So let's talk about the Ole Miss game. You might see the shirt that I'm wearing. This shirt was the shirt that was given out on the concourse and over by the student section before this game. Like the first 1,000 fans got it. It was blue collar night, and so you would hope that the team and the players would have prioritized being blue collar. And as Nate Oates put it in his press conference, he just felt like that just wasn't the case. He took some onus when it came to this, whether he was like, I don't know if I didn't prepare the team enough. I don't know, what it was. Obviously, they played a very physical game when it came Saturday with Texas A&M. And so there was a little bit of an understanding that with A&M, you don't need to stress out the team. You don't need to go too hard in practice. But it also is the understanding that when it comes to, they have to be ready and prepared for the game, right? So Nate talked about, how they tried to go light in practice. They didn't go super long. They were trying to get their legs back under them. And this is something that they do when you have a shorter week, right? We had a Tuesday game instead of a Wednesday game, so you have a slightly shorter week to prepare. But so did Ole Miss, right? Ole Miss also played on Saturday, also, has the shorter week to prepare. And it didn't seem to affect them as much as it did Alabama. Now, granted, we played Texas A&M. Ole Miss did not play as physical of a game. But this definitely seemed to play in a good bit during this game. The other thing that when you look at this game is, a lot has been made this season about Alabama's defense, right? Cliff Amore was brought in to be the defensive stopper, to be the rim protector, and to really shore up the defense because last season defense was a massive problem. And unfortunately, this game, the defense wasn't our issue. This season, defense has been a large percentage of the problem. Prior to this game, Alabama actually had the number 2 offense in the country. Their offensive rating did go down a good bit after this game. Oddly enough, their defensive rating went up, right? So when you look at what the problem was in this game, typically, people that want to make fun of a Nate Oates coach team, they say often that the defense is the issue. Now, those people are typically misinformed because the 2 best Nate Oates teams that both, the one that won the double SEC in 2021 and in 2023, they both had top 5 defenses in the country, right? So Nate Oates is known for his offensive style, but his defensive style is actually something that he prides himself on a little bit more than the offense even. But admittedly, the offense was the issue in this game. Sorry about that. The offense was the issue in this game. And it really felt like the only guy who could get going and had some success from an offensive standpoint was Aden Holloway. Aden played a pretty good game, but, you had poor offensive showings out of LeBaron and Grant, both of which, typically are pretty good. I know Grant missed quite a few free throws. LeBaron just was completely cold the entire night. Goes 0 of 8 from the field. And it was really just a situation where you were without Darion Reed, who was out in this game. And obviously Houston Mallette, we've talked about how he potentially is going to be getting a medical. And then Latrell Wrightsville obviously out for the Achilles. So you had a fairly short rotation. You had 9 scholarship guys ready to go. And unfortunately, you only really had 2 guys that came to play. Jaron Stevenson had a great game. Wasn't the most efficient from an offensive standpoint. Goes 1 of 3 from 3, 2 of 3 from 2. But had some really good cuts. Was awesome on the defensive end. Had 7 rebounds. Had a couple of blocks. And really has come into his own from a rebounding standpoint, right? And from a defensive standpoint. Nate talked about how they had kind of told Jaron, hey, some of the best defenders we've had, it's not like they don't make mistakes, right? You may make a mistake, but you use your athleticism and your talent to make up for said mistake and be able to get a block, right? He used Keon Ellis and Herb Jones as a couple of examples for Jaren, and it really feels like Jaren has unlocked that potential from a defensive standpoint. You've seen multiple blocks out of Jaren in the last few games. You've seen him really playing with a little bit more fire from a defensive standpoint. But then also, he's been attacking the rim a little more. You saw a couple of cuts in this one. Oddly enough, the two that he missed was actually a missed dunk where he just held onto the rim too long and ended up, missing the dunk. But it really was a standpoint where Jaren has looked a lot better, cutting without the ball, not being just a feet in the sand 3-point shooter, because that's not who he is, right? He's not a feet in the sand 3-point shooter. He's obviously had some 3-point struggles this season, but even when he is shooting the three well, that's not who he is. He's not going to be a just set shooter the whole time. And so as he's using his athleticism, Jaren has been able to really contribute to the team much more than others. Aiden, was the one guy that really was successful from an offensive standpoint in this game. 4 of 4, 1 of 2 from 3, 4 of 4 from the line. Did also have 6 rebounds, 3 assists, right? Aiden was kind of the do-it-all. He was pretty good from a defensive standpoint. Staying in front of his man, I'm not calling him perfect, but for Aiden Holloway, it was a good defensive game. And really the problem in this game was turnovers, right? Turnovers was the issue in this game. Sorry, I still have the cold and cough that I'm trying to get over. But turnovers was really the issue in this game. Turnovers was not just lousy with the basketball. You have to really give Ole Miss some credit here. Chris Beard did a really, really good job scouting the team. They were jumping in passing lanes. Anytime anything was slightly slow, it was getting picked off, and Ole Miss was taking advantage, right? But Ole Miss was just the more physical team this entire game. They had 9 offensive rebounds. They had less defensive, but that's because they had less shots, right? So since we took less shots, we got more defensive rebounds. Makes sense. They ended up with 14 steals. That leads to a lot of points in transition, a lot of points off turnovers. It just leads to Ole Miss, winning this game, right? If Alabama would have been able to put together some semblance of an offense and stop turning over the ball, Alabama would have been successful in this game, right? But this is a perfect example of, and we talked about it in the post-game space, Alabama didn't deserve to win this game, right? This is actually a game where if you win it, you're a little concerned for what message it's going to send the team, because it could send the message of you had a ton of turnovers, you played terribly, but you won the game, right? The other game this season that we've had this many turnovers, which this did set the record for the season, but the only other game that broke 20 turnovers was Rutgers. You actually won that game, right? So this is a situation where the team maybe didn't learn their lesson of like, hey, a ton of turnovers ends up in a loss. Granted, we did lose the next game against Oregon, but it is a situation where this teaches the team, like, A, you have to be locked in, right? I don't care what you think, and you have to be locked in from both sides of the basketball, right? You were locked in on defense, at least for the most part, but you weren't locked in on offense, and it cost you this game, right? 64 points is the least amount of points a NATO's team has scored since San Diego State when we got knocked out of the Sweet 16 2 years ago. 64 points is just not a score that you expect the number one scoring team in the country to score. And if Alabama could have put together a semblance of offense, Alabama wins this game. The free throw shooting was not great. Grant missed some kind of in the clutch, but it wasn't actually the problem. Alabama shot 73% from the free throw line. Granted, Ole Miss hit some big free throws down the stretch with Jamin Bregfield. He goes 6 of 6 from the line toward the end of the game, and it iced the game. So obviously Ole Miss hitting those free throws did help ice the game, but Alabama missing the free throws they missed was not the difference in the game. Would have been better to hit them, obviously, but was not the difference. It was really just from an offensive standpoint. in my opinion, and I talked about this again after the game, I think due to Ole Miss's lack of interior size and Malik Dia being the main interior presence in this game, I really felt like Alabama's goal was to drive to the basket, but Ole Miss's quickness and defense stayed in front of us, and we just didn't get the interior passing or get the interior drives that we wanted. And when our guys would drive interior, if they left their feet, they would end up trying to pass out, and it led to a turnover 9 times out of 10. There were a couple of open threes that they got to Chris Youngblood. He did hit 2 of them, but ended up going 2 of 7, or actually 2 of 8, sorry. So that was a problem. He was really, if he's going to be, the 3-point shooter we expect him to be, we're going to need him to hit a few more of those. That is one thing that I think in this game that Alabama did not attack enough was the 3-point shot. It really felt like Alabama was trying to attack the paint and pass out. And Ole Miss's quick hands, quick movements, knowledge of our cuts, knowledge of where the passing lanes were, just caused way too many steals and way too many turnovers. Right? So I do think that this was a good scout by Chris Beard, a good job by Ole Miss. But as much as it was a good job by Ole Miss, I think it was a poor job by the coaching staff and by the team. They just were not prepared. We're not ready for this. Nate Oates mentioned that he was upset. Ole Miss ends up beating us by 17 blue-collar points on blue-collar night, which was a problem. Obviously, Nate was worried about, hey, like, in a lot of cases, our poor shooting was kind of covered up by our good offensive rebounding, because that good offensive rebounding can get you the extra possessions, and the offensive rebounds are often where some of the best 3-point shots come. Alabama only has 4, but actually they only had 3 because one of those got credited to Jaron on his missed dunk attempt, because it says he got his own offensive rebound that he then turned over. So really Alabama gets 3 offensive rebounds in this game, and that's something that's a problem, right? When your offense is struggling at the rate that it was in this game, getting an extra possession would have been super helpful, obviously from the open 3 standpoint, with the best, threes being off the offensive rebound, but also just a standpoint of getting some level of life into the team. And it just didn't happen, right? So Alabama drops this game. Alabama drops to 3-1. You don't want to lose a game at home. It's going to hurt you in the race for the SEC. But it happened. So now you just got to move on to the next. You have to pick up another win on the road that maybe you were not planning on, or that was kind of a toss-up. But that's what you got to do, right? And the best available chance to get that win on the road that we're talking about comes in the next game against Kentucky. So let's talk about that one. As I mentioned,